Well, Dr. Freeman, might we ask you to take up your task again and complete your summary of your evidence, please?
Thank you very much. I think we had just got to the third bullet point on this list, and just to briefly summarise what has been discussed at some length over the past few days, the implications of the 2020 National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, with that quite significant change to the national bottom line for nitrate nitrogen, dropping from the median of 6.9 to a median of 2.4, with similar changes to the 95 percentiles. And that clearly is a very significant change from the 2014-2017 National Policy Statement. Also, other things obviously that have changed since the plan was notified now, as well as the NPS. We obviously have new NES with some important changes that will ideally need to be remodeled, assumptions about what the maximum synthetic nitrogen fertilizer application rates are going to be, because obviously that changes as of next year to a maximum of 190 kilograms of N per hectare per year as synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. And obviously in an ideal world, these should all be significant changes that can be remodeled. So really just getting into some of my conclusions of the modeling, that I clearly don't consider that it's an appropriate basis for setting a 60-year regulatory program. The uncertainties, even if the assumptions and other significant limitations of the model are resolved, there will still be inherent significant uncertainties that in my mind means that it's not appropriate to essentially try and lock in a 60-year regulatory program. And just to clarify, the implications of that are that the high level of uncertainty means that it could go either way. And it's not really, well, I couldn't outguess it at this point in time, and it will vary from parts of the zone to other parts of the zone. But the reality is that there could be a significant overshooting or undershooting in terms of what the proposed provisions would actually result in. And I put this in, this isn't in my original evidence, but I put this in just as a simple description that is used in a number of technical reports, just to illustrate that in many modeling processes that simple models, if you like, at the left-hand side of the graph, very simple models can have a high level of model error. And then as we try to make models more complex, at a certain point, a certain amount of additional complexity can reduce the error. But then when a model gets more complex and has more components in it, more inputs, more parameters, more assumptions, then there's a point at which then the modeling error increases. So and it's also, I think it's useful to pick out from that green line, if you like, showing model error. It doesn't drop down to a very low figure. It is really essentially saying that with this type of modeling, there is inherent uncertainty. And the challenge for all of us then is to say, right, well, how can that inherent uncertainty be built into a plan to take that into account? And I suppose this is one of the key points in my mind, is that part of taking that uncertainty into account is having a very comprehensive and signaled program of monitoring and investigation to feed back in a continuous cycle, to feed back into the modeling, to check how it's been going, and then ideally to have a policy and rule regime that can take account of new information coming in, that might say, right, we're on the right track, so we'll stay on this track. Alternatively, the monitoring information might come in and say, whoa, no, we're not having the desired result, so something else needs to be done, or as has been indicated by some submitters, some other provisions might automatically kick in if a certain state of the environment is actually monitored. And there are examples around New Zealand where plans have been put together that take account of this sort of option of feeding real information back into a planning regime. An example, I think somebody touched on it earlier in the week, is the Bay of Plenty plan change for managing the water quality of Lake Rotorua. That has a number of these types of measures specifically built into it in an adaptive feedback mechanism, because with something like Lake Rotorua, everybody understood well that there were significant uncertainties in modelling the loads required to achieve the water quality sought. And this is a very similar type of situation. So just to quickly conclude and cover that, I think there are significant water quality issues in the Waimakariri zone, and I'm not by any stretch of the imagination saying there are no issues. There are, as many submitters have identified. There are significant issues, and they undoubtedly will require some reductions in nitrogen losses, particularly in some areas. But also I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that there are other contaminants that are having demonstrable effects, and measures will be needed to address those as well. The PC7 modelling involves inappropriate assumptions, doesn't comply with established good practice, and has a very high level of uncertainty. So therefore, I don't consider that it's an appropriate basis for a locked-in regulatory program that has been built into PC7 as it stands. I consider that technically the modelling needs to be redone to take account of the issues I've identified, and to take account of the new NPS bottom lines, and to take account of the requirements that have kicked in with the NES. Now, I'm not necessarily saying I have all the answers. I'm really just providing technical input to assist the process. But to me, the technical evidence does seem to indicate that an interim plan could be workable that includes some of these GMP initial nitrogen loss reduction programs that clearly a number of industry bodies with a good understanding of what's achievable have signalled these levels of reduction are achievable. I think there would be considerable benefit in just incorporating that as an interim plan, but I also think more work needs to be done in the Silverstream catchment area to better understand exactly what's been happening there and what would be needed to do to address that very significant increase in nitrate nitrogen that's been monitored in the Silverstream catchment. And last and certainly not least, I think, and this may be, I suppose, running counter to how some regional plans are put together, but I do consider that it is extremely useful if a regional plan specifies the type of monitoring and investigation that is needed, particularly where there is inherent uncertainty in the technical basis for the plan. I don't think it's useful for all the people involved to leave aside the sort of monitoring and investigation. I think we need to move to a concept of a plan as being something that needs to improve over time, and it can improve over time with a commitment to serious monitoring programs. So I would personally strongly promote provisions going in a plan that make it clear what type of monitoring and investigation information is needed to improve the plan over time. Thank you, Your Honour. Thank you, Commissioners. I'm very happy to answer questions.
Thank you. May we start with Commissioner Van Veldhuizen, please?
No questions from the actual evidence. I'm just interested in the diagrams that you attached to the PowerPoint, the figures. And yourself and other witnesses have raised the issue of the NPA not capturing all of the cust surface water catchment.
Yep, so hang on.
Is it your figure on page 18 or page 17 that shows that?
Oh, this one here, you mean?
No.
Oh. Well, this one, if I can, does the mouse?
In your PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, well, arguably this one does. This shows the NPA zones, and if you see the bright green lines, so where the Cust River is written in there, the green lines around it are the catchment for the Cust River. So I think what that is showing me is that, if you like, the NPA part covers approximately half of that total Cust River catchment, as I understand it.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the figures attached to your PowerPoint, so I'd prefer you to go to one of those.
Yeah, this is the PowerPoint.
Yeah, well, keep going. Go backwards then. That one. So does that show the Cust River catchment you're talking about, or is that something different?
This is the diagram from Ms. Krelliger and Mr. Etheridge's memo that was done, I think, after the plan was notified, where they acknowledge, if that's the right word to use, that an expanded NPA would incorporate more of the catchments, and so the red line there is showing the NPA area, and the green line on the outside is showing what, in their view, would be a full catchment area. Now, I'm trying to summarise someone else's work, but Ms. Krelliger, who's in the room, might be able to confirm that better than I.
And if you go back one more slide. So see the label Ohaka Stream. What's the grey line above that? What's that showing us? What's that outline? You see there's a dark grey
that
zone.
could be the catchment. I'd have to line it up with my other diagram that that ostensibly does have the catchment in, because that diagram that I was showing you with the bright green lines, those are the catchment areas directly from ECAN's GIS database that they very kindly provide for external users.
Okay. All right, well, I'm sure we'll hear more about this in reply, but thank you for that.
Okay, yep.
No further questions.
Sorry, if I may just interrupt at this stage. I had indicated that Dr. Freeman might resolve one or two matters that it would put to me. So, and I appreciate that Mr. Van Voorthuizen may wish to ask further questions, but on arising from what Dr. Freeman may say on that. But if you may just take a moment to address those.
Sure. Well, as I understand it, there was a question hovering for me about the maximum acceptable values for nitrate nitrogen. I mean, I'm clearly not a medical doctor, but I can summarise my understanding of how organisations like the World Health Organization have developed their recommendations on nitrate nitrogen maximum acceptable values, and then organisations like the New Zealand Ministry of Health then use that information.
Whether this is getting into an area that we should be receiving in this way, Mr. Van der Waal. I'm not wishing to belittle Dr. Freeman's skills and experience and qualifications, but I'm just not sure that this is quite the right way for us to accept what is in effect a challenge to another witness's evidence, that other witness being within scope, or within the scope of his expertise. I think perhaps if you really want us to have Dr. Freeman's opinion about how that work is done, you ought to qualify him perhaps more deliberately than you have done.
Well, Your Honour, perhaps it was simply in terms of his understanding of not the medical aspects, but how that intersects with his water quality expertise, given that maximum the MAVs are applied in a water quality setting as well. I will add that I do think that Dr. Black has rebutted the most of that evidence in any event to a level on which I'm content to rely. It was really simply, I was hoping whether Dr. Freeman could provide some comment, and if he feels not sufficiently qualified to do so, but on whether an MAV can be used to say, well, beyond this point, a certain adverse effect will definitely happen.
I had the feeling in my role that there's nothing that Dr. Freeman can add to the evidence of people with more specific qualifications on the subject that can help us.
Your Honour, I'm happy to accept that position, and then there was the other issue that Mr van Voorthuysen raised with me in terms of detail about the monitoring. Now, I'm not quite sure whether that's already been answered by Dr. Freeman's evidence already, or whether, Commissioner, you would like some further clarification on that point.
I was happy with the answers that you gave to those questions, actually. It was more about implementation practicality, so I'm satisfied with the answers already given. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Solomon, do you have any questions of Dr. Freeman?
Any questions that I did have, and I thank you for your clear and easy to understand presentation, because I did find your evidence and shape quite technical and complex, but your presentation has cleared any confusion that I had up, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
On the meaning of the word limit, and I'm sure everybody here agrees with your urging common understanding and careful use of terms. And I think you said that you acknowledged that one could have a limit on something by way of mass, such as grams or kilograms or something like that. But I got the feeling that you were not comfortable with using the word limit in relation to something by concentration of a content. And I'm not really thinking that I understand why that isn't something that should be limited as well.
Yes, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it shouldn't be limited, but I think there's a danger, and I must apologise that I haven't put as much time as I would love to go through all the relevant rules and all the relevant tables and see if there are any just technical gremlins in terms of, well, what does this rule mean when it points to this table, and this table says a limit, and the rule says something like you must stay within the limits specified there, and then there's another table that talks about a limit but means that word as a concentration limit, whereas the other table means it as a mass loading limit on, say, kilograms of N per hectare per year. All I think I'm highlighting is that I think there's a good chance that if we're not really precise about the meaning of words, something's going to go wrong in that complex relationship between about half a dozen rules referring to 3 or 4 tables that use words with 2 meanings. And I haven't gone through and tried to draw a line between each and try and figure out, is there a potential problem, but I suspect there will be, and it often sometimes only happens in these types of situations where everything's wrapped up and then given to, say, a consents department and consultants to implement the rules. It's at that point that sometimes people realize, gosh, what did the planners mean when they use this terminology? And all I suppose I'm signaling here is that I think there's potential for problems if a word is used with 2 meanings.
Thank you. My next question draws on your admirable experience. Is it desirable, is it part of the function of a regional plan, or plan change for that matter, to include commitments for monitoring or modelling or other executive activities which public bodies normally expect to manage by political decision making, particularly involving the balanced use of their resources and reflecting the membership of the political body from time to time?
At the risk of, I don't want to sound political at all, but I tend to think these days that where we inevitably have to use models to help the management of natural resources, and the aphorism that is often used that is relevant is that all models are wrong, but some are useful. So they are useful, but they are inherently uncertain. And therefore, if we just think about a plan as something that is done for a 10-year period and someone else will come along and revisit it in 10 years, I suggest that plans that are reliant on modelling can no longer just lock something in for 10 years and walk away from it, that the plans have to involve some clear monitoring and investigation programs to feed back into the process. So as an example, and I'm not an expert in it, but Plan Change 10 with Lake Rotorua does that in a useful way that, as I understand how it operates, is that it will have some policies and rules that say if the monitoring from this program that is outlined in the plan, if the monitoring from that program comes back with these results, then these provisions will apply. So it's very clearly recognizing that it's not a perfect world, the modelling is uncertain, but you'll reduce the uncertainty if you go out, monitor for this, bring it back into the plan regime in a proper way with certainty built into the policies and the rules so everybody knows if this happens, then that happens. In the same way that happens in Canterbury with Lake Benmore, that nitrogen loads into Lake Benmore are controlled by or the allowable nitrogen loads into Lake Benmore are controlled by the TLI that is monitored in the lake. So if the TLI goes over a certain amount, then those consent holders know that their nitrogen loads will be reviewed and will go up. It's really just recognizing the uncertainty and thinking about how that uncertainty can be built into the planning process or built into a resource consent that recognizes the reality that this modelling is not perfect, there will be uncertainty, and somehow think imaginatively about how that can be brought properly into the plan regime. So I'm not necessarily saying that this would somehow inappropriately require elected members to do something. I'm more suggesting in a way that any plan commits council to a course of action. All I'm suggesting is that part of that plan, increasingly, we need to think about building in the monitoring and investigation that's needed to inform that plan as it moves along.
Well, thank you for your answer. The question of what can be included by way of a commitment in a plan is perhaps one that Mr. Van der Waal will make a comment on in closing. But there was one further question I was going to come to with your evidence, which we've all found very helpful, Dr. Freeman. Our task as a commission is to consider and report on whether the plan change as notified can and should be improved by adopting or adapting within scope any of the amendments requested in the submissions. Your evidence explains what your qualifications and experience indicate are deficiencies in the plan change and in the process of formulating it. And we all acknowledge the point that Mr. Van der Waal made earlier in the day, that there will need to be further activity over the next few years, and all of those deficiencies that you've identified would need to be considered for that activity. But what I'm focusing on at the moment is, of the amendments requested by submitters to the content of the plan change number 7, which of them do you support? Or is that not really the question that you were asked?
No, it's not the question I was asked. I was asked to look at the plan. Although the question I have asked myself, which may sort of run parallel to your question, is what submissions have been made that align with what I have suggested as a possible course of action. And I must admit, I haven't studied every single submission to see whether I could then say submitter XYZ said, I want a much bigger NPA area like this. I haven't gone through and checked every submission along those lines, and my evidence has not been put together in any shape or form, really, to align with a particular submission. It's really just been a helicopter in and say, is this a rigorous piece of work in a technical sense and a planning sense? And I've just really identified areas where I think it could be improved and hope that that's a useful contribution to the process.
Of course it's useful, and I'm not in any way wanting to belittle it. One final point. You made the point, and it was another point that seemed to appeal to me, about the lack of transparency in the causal connections in the framework that lies behind the plan change. In other words, the connection between any particular rule or limit or whatever, and the policies, the objectives, the superior instruments. Is it, in your experience, and I see from your evidence that you've got considerable experience with regional plans in these areas, is it normally done that kind of pattern of network of connections is transparently expressed in the plan change itself?
Certainly not always. I think I might be right in saying that in some other areas of plans, regional or district, there seems to be a clearer thread between a high-level objective and details in the rule. And maybe as an example, if it's relevant, I think, say, for example, some district plans might have a much clearer thread between, say, I don't know, city form and translating city form objectives into building heights. And there'll be a policy that might say something like buildings shall not be higher than 7 stories, and then the rules will build on that. So you've got a very clear sort of stepped down to the rule. You can follow each step in the process. But I must admit, yes, I have a lot of time that I've spent looking at regional plans, but I must admit I am very frustrated that most of them just seem to repeat wording in higher order documents, and then a package of rules appears out of nowhere. This plan change, I must acknowledge, is an improvement on that, but as I say, I couldn't find the policy framework that said, right, we're going to translate high-level statements about water being safe for drinking, we'll translate that into half MAV for these reasons. It's then suddenly half MAV appears as a number in a table in the rules without a clear logical progression to explain why half MAV here, or why 1 gram of N per cubic meter in this stream and 3.8 in this stream and 6.9 in this one. There just seems to be something, a step missing in that process. And it's not unique. There just seems to be some difficulty in clarifying how you get from very broad statements down to the details of rules and what I would call water quality standards, for example.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Van der Waal, we've been very much helped by all of the evidence that you've presented to us on behalf of As One Incorporated, and we thank you and the whole collective for all of that. Is there anything that you were inclined to say by way of closing?
Yes, Your Honour, thank you for that, and thank you for the helpful questions as well. If I may firstly return to Your Honour's question about the use of the word ambitious in the 2020 National Policy Statement. And I note that it appears in clause 3.32b. And I note very importantly that it says that long-term visions must set goals that are ambitious but reasonable. And I think, and then we have the wording in brackets which clarifies it further, which is difficult but not impossible. And much of the evidence that the panel has heard from the lay witnesses of fact, will, in my submission, demonstrate the impossibility of a lot of the goals or the aims that have been set. I think that what also emerges from that evidence is that they of themselves are ambitious in the way that they have tackled this issue and have made very positive changes to affect positive outcomes in terms of water quality. And so I think what's really important, and the word reasonable, again, is absolutely critical in there. And it denotes that it shouldn't be difficult for the sake of it, but it should be difficult but achievable in terms of the overall goals set by this national policy statement. So it requires higher standards, and perhaps that allows me just to slide into another issue, just in terms of Your Honour's question about the limits of what a plan can compel a local body authority to do. And I recognise there are constraints in terms of the long-term planning process, the community planning process and the resourcing and those particular matters. But I do wish to observe that the requirements for best evidence or best information, which I did address in my written submissions, and those are at page 18, they do stress the importance of making sure there is adequate information. And I haven't heard evidence that shows that doing the kind of things that Dr. Freeman has indicated would have been basic best practice was impracticable or unachievable in terms of the current financial constraints. What's connected to this as well is Mr. van Voorthuysen's question again about the limits as to what can be done in terms of reviewing consent conditions. Again, I think that if individual consent holders of existing consents were faced with the choice between being stuck with long-term goals that are set in concrete and will send them out of business, or applying for changes themselves to enable this kind of monitoring requirement to be imposed, if they were given the choice, then certainly I think they would take the lesser of two evils, which in my submission would be the latter. So it's not an absolute bar, and of course we do have the ability for these matters to be signalled and looked at in terms of how any further plan change may attack that issue. But I do acknowledge there is a tension there, but then the question is, does that mean then that all the cost gets put onto the actual members of the community at the expense of the existence of many of those businesses to that degree, because it's not to be put on the council? To what extent? I think that, well, let me rephrase it this way. There is a certain understanding that the council should have public funding to a level that allows it to carry out its statutory functions, and that must be informed by those very important requirements now for best information, which seem to have placed those requirements on local government bodies. And I accept that it's subject to the limits of what's practicable. But again, I haven't seen evidence that shows that what just the improvements or addressing the key flaws that Dr. Freeman has identified is totally impracticable or practicable or unachievable. So I don't know if that takes, if that answers Your Honour's concerns about that.
Well, I'm not wanting to do more than give you the opportunity to say what you choose, and you've said it. Thank you, Mr. Van der Waal. Is there some other method that you'd like to come to?
Yes, sir. The other thing that I wish to pick up on again, and I'm pleased that Your Honour picked up on it, and it was a matter that came out in the evidence of Dr. Black, which was, I raise it now because Your Honour mentioned the word causality, and that is an important part of resource management, as Your Honour will be more than aware, in terms of effects and the need for a causal link to be established. And in my submission, that's a key matter here, is the causal link between what is occurring, what is in the environment, and the concerns, and the need to establish a causal link between both the activities that are aiming to be controlled and the effectiveness of the measures that are going to be imposed. Just in terms of Your Honour's question to Dr. Freeman about which relief he's supporting, in my submission, it is appropriate for him as an independent expert not to side heavily with one party. But it is my position as an advocate to be able to submit, which I do quite emphatically, that his evidence demonstrates quite strongly, or is a very strong part of the puzzle that demonstrates that the relief sought by as one is the most appropriate way of giving effect to the higher order policy documents and the purpose of the Act which they reflect. So it's my submission that certainly very strongly underpins as one's case. There was another word of caution I wanted to raise, and that is just in connection with the word uncertainty, and it's used in the best information requirements, but I think that should be distinguished from inadequacy. There are certain things that are inadequate, and they can be fixed, and then there are certain things that it's just not practicable to get more certainty on them. And that's an important distinction, and I do believe that a lot of what Dr. Freeman has identified relates to inadequacies that can and should be fixed. And to wrap it up, really, I believe that his evidence in particular, but the evidence you've heard, comes back to the key function of this panel, and is to evaluate the various relief sought against the statutory tests. And if I may go back to the analogy I used at the beginning, to understand the solution and to apply the tests, really the panel needs to know how bad is it. And Dr. Freeman's evidence has indicated that the panel doesn't really have an accurate picture of that. How much is needed? Again, there's considerable doubt around that. And how much will the measures achieve? And again, all of that is thrown into a great deal of question if the provisions are left as the 42A officers propose. But all those matters are resolved, and there's a clear pathway to resolving them if this panel adopts the relief sought by as one. And that's where I would like to leave matters unless any further questions arise.
Commissioners, content with that?
Yeah, no further questions from me, thank you.
Nor me, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Van der Waal, and thank you for your whole team, and we're grateful for the presentation of the submission today.
Thank you, Your Honour, and I wish to thank Your Honour and the Commissioners for the very fair hearing I feel we've had.
Now, I think that we understood that the submissions that were also wrapped up with evidence for as one incorporated were not calling for separate hearing this afternoon. But just to be sure I haven't misunderstood, Mr. Gavin Reid not here? No. Four Hoobs and Mr. Nalder, they've done their piece. Mrs. Mertens was here before, and I think she wasn't expecting to speak again. Mr. Hawkins? No. So I think we come now to the submission of Aratika Trust. Good afternoon and welcome to you. Will you introduce yourselves, please?
Yep. I'm Clarence Timperley. I farm a substantial amount of land in the Waimak zone, have been there for a number of time. Also, I've got my daughters, Victoria, a trainer, and Hazel Clark. I also have another daughter who is actually allocated the babysitting role this afternoon for their grandchildren, so she couldn't participate, but she would have liked to.
Oh, well. There's more important priorities than planned hearings.
Yeah. Thank you for allowing us to have the slot to speak. We're probably not going to do down the technical stuff that you've just had in the previous speaker, but our submission I delivered to the Council on the 11th of the 9th, 2019. And part of that, in reference to number 4 of our submission and the economic financial implications, I just wanted to revisit the fact that we have many families relying on employment and a major part of our farming operation. My farming career has been enhanced by the success and the value of members of our staff, all doing their job to provide a strong team, as well as they have been heavily involved in the community, which is, we've had staff up to 40 years in our employment, so we've been very fortunate. As a family, we've been involved in the pork industry in New Zealand, providing genetic seed stock to a nationwide of up to 60% of New Zealand genetics in part of our farms. I've been in the industry for over 40 years, and the genetics change over the last 40 years. For example, mothering ability has improved, feed efficiency, and the reason I say this is I see that the science and technology and data recording that has been selected through this selection for animals is amazing to see what can be achieved. And I see this as part of the plan going forward, that there will be science and other things that will help this. Following that, farmers are thrown under have lots of things to face, unknowingly, the environment, rain, wind, sun, and all other things that are out of control. Farmers have to deal with drought, floods, earthquakes, changing markets, animal viruses, COVID, and a number of other things. But they are a very resilient lot, farmers, and in time they adapt to conditions, and the challenges over time, they induce it and run with it. I am a proud father, and I have 3 well-educated daughters that had a professional career outside the industry and decided to return to the land and now run our farming businesses alongside with their husbands. When we analyse some of these proposed environmental changes like this, it makes me very nervous when we get a bit of paper like this sitting with all the different codes and where the proposals of the changes will be. Already we have compromised and done other things to do this. The urban spread also impacted the environment around us. For example, we have sewage systems that aren't up to standard and waste and other systems that are influential to the water. Sometimes I think the farmer becomes the scapegoat for what happens in each district, as some of these urban dwellings and other things aren't up to speed. Over my lifetime, I've been on a number of boards, different boards, and have been a part of a lot of strategic meetings. Never have I seen a proposed plan that goes out for 60 years. Most of these plans go 5 or 10 and then reviewed to allow the data and the information to come to light and to be referenced. I agree with the reductions of the proposed 2030. With further changes with science and genetics management, we can work towards 2040. Being more relevant to the major reviews of 10 years intervals, rather than the proposal to be set in concrete for a further generation to face. Hopefully the Commissioner and the Planner will see common sense as they revise the proposal. I had the job of picking my granddaughter up from kindy, and I was told not to let her go to sleep. Whatever you do, don't let her go to sleep. So on the way home, I tried to ask her where we lived and one thing, where the driveway was. And she turned to me and said, "Papa, I won't have to learn to drive. I will tell the car where to take me." And here we are already. She's working out that technology's coming. Get to the mailbox, and what happened? She fell asleep. So in that light, that's the reason we're here today. And thank you for your time. And we will answer any questions regarding our enterprise from the three of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Van Vertesen?
No questions, thank you. We also had the benefit from hearing from, I think, both your daughters already earlier in the hearing,
yes.
So that's been helpful, but no further questions at this stage. Thank you.
Commissioner Solomon?
Yes, just one. And again, I'm sorry to have to take you back down to the small picture. But where the farm where your piggery is located, how far away is that from Silverstream?
Oh, a long way away.
Long way away.
Yeah.
Are there any waterways, other waterways
No,
on your
there's no
property?
waterways near the piggery, and it's at the very top of the catchment. It's sitting located in the blue area.
Okay.
Yeah. It's Dad sat on the pork board for a very long time, so the piggery itself is of a very high standard. He had to set a standard. So, yeah.
Lead by example, in other words.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you. I have no further questions.
I just need to make sure that the ladies know that what our program is. If they'd like to keep on coming in, we'd like to see them every day. We won't be sitting next week, but the week after we'll be back again, and you'll always be welcome.
Thank you.
This is very important to them going forward. They've made farming their career. Thank you.
I hope it's of interest as well as it's important, and we certainly understand how important it is. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bishop Farms. Good afternoon and welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name's Darcy Bishop,
Yes,
and I'm a dairy farmer in German Road in Oxford.
yes,
So I'm a director of Bishop Farms Oxford Limited, and I provided a submission number 325 on behalf of Bishop Farms Oxford on proposed Plan Change 7 of the Canterbury Land and Water Regional Plan.
yes, thank you for doing that. We welcome the submission and we welcome you coming to talk to it.
Thank you.
So just feel comfortable to address us about the submission as you would like.
Thank you. Bishop Farms Oxford Limited owns a 285 hectare, 940 cow family owned and operated dairy enterprise on German Road, Waimakariri District, Canterbury. We employ 3 staff members and winter graze all our dairy cows on 2 local farms. I've lived in Oxford for nearly 7 years. Our staff and family members are heavily involved in the community. My children attend Cust Preschool and Cust Primary School.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Don't know why I got emotional there, but yeah, Cust Preschool and Cust Primary
Just
School.
take a pause if you'd like to. Just take a pause. There's no rush.
I'm all good. Our employees' children attend Oxford Area School and their wives work in the local aged care facility. We belong to the Oxford Rugby Club, the Oxford Cricket Club, the Waimakariri Golf Club and Oxford Workingmen's Club. My father, Wayne Bishop, is involved in the Well Remuneration Committee. We support all local businesses and we use local rural service providers. I'm a shareholder of the Waimakariri Irrigation Limited. I'm a 4th generation dairy farmer and I pride myself on always adapting to an ever-changing industry through technology that makes farming both easier and better for the environment. The water for our irrigation comes via Will's open channel races, which feed into our 10 hectare storage pond. Our pond allows us to store approximately a month of water, depending on seasonal demand. Will requires us to have regen, which promotes good management practice, decisions around on-farm irrigation on farm, and also when we should be applying effluent. Our effluent is applied following good management practices that are audited as part of our FEP audit on farm. When we first purchased the farm in 2014, we upgraded the irrigation from long-line sprinklers to centre pivots, with the investment in 6 wiper pivots for the corners covering an area of 50 hectares. This was very costly, but we understood the importance of being more efficient and how it was better for the environment. On farm, all our water use for irrigation is monitored via telemetry, which both Will and he can monitor. This is done at both our pond intake and at our pumps for the pivots. We utilise industry professionals in all aspects of our nutrient management and planning to ensure good management practices are followed. As part of Will, we have an FEP and are required to be independently audited. This involves showcasing our on-farm management practices so they can be compared with the industry good management practices. This requires us to keep records such as stock numbers on farm, fertiliser use, soil tests, effluent irrigation, etc. to demonstrate how we do things on farm. We currently hold a B grade for our FEP audit. The proposed changes under PC7 for sub-area E that our farm is located in will have a major impact on our farming business. The long-term reductions that have been proposed are daunting and effectively devalue our farming business, as under the level of reductions required, no one would be able to run a profitable farming system on our property. Under PC7, we would have to severely reduce our farming operation. This would not only affect the profitability of our farm, but also the livelihoods of our staff, which would face reduced hours or job losses as the farming operation is made smaller and less profitable. And we pride ourselves on keeping staff long term and investing in their personal development and skills. They play an important role in both our farming business and the local farming community. We are aware that changes need to be made and have already invested in infrastructure and practices that make sure our farm is operating sustainably. When we purchased our farm in 2014, we made sure to do our due diligence, both of the farming business, but also to consider the longevity of the farm under the proposed environmental regulations. Back in 2014, our farm was in an area that did not require the highest level of reductions when within the catchment. It was the polar opposite of the Plan Change 7 reductions. The zones have changed completely, with the area classes as sub-area A being classified as having the greatest impact and greatest reductions required. We purchased this farm with a view of having a long-term investment, one where our children would have the opportunity to be the 5th generation of dairy farmers in the family. We made the decision to purchase a farm that had the infrastructure and adaptability to change, but never considered that there would be such a change proposed as of PC7. We are concerned that the reduction in farming operations in our area will have a knock-on effect to the community and may even erode the financial viability of businesses within the local towns. Like all businesses, we like to have peace of mind and certainty that we can continue to operate. The proposed PC7 reductions have imposed a large level of stress and uncertainty for our farming business, and this has taken a personal toll on myself and others in our farming family business. We believe we are good custodians of the land and have been working in partnership with ECAN for the past 6 years, having effluent audits and checks on our irrigation storage pond for compliance. We make informed decisions. We made informed decisions back in 2019 when we purchased this farm, taking into account the environmental regulations that we would have to adapt to, and these have completely changed in the last 6 years, which does not provide us with a strong level of certainty for the future of our business. We have actively taken part in WRRP auditing program, using good management practices on farm, and continue to invest in environmental improvements on farm. We believe that having forecast reductions proposed until 2080 does not allow us the opportunity to evaluate what the changes we have already done on farm and changes we will continue to make in the short term are having on the nitrogen leaching levels in the catchment. This does not give us a feeling of certainty to make large-scale investments and changes if we are unable to have a profitable farming business beyond 2040. We feel that it is grossly unfair to now fundamentally change the regime as proposed without a proven approach to nitrate reductions. We feel that it is essential that the plan change moves from a methodology to a measured science basis for determining the appropriate nitrate management process and reductions if required. I believe as farmers we have a role to play in promoting what is best for the environment and need to have our efforts to date recognised. We are aware that changes need to be made, but these changes need to be sustainable and supported by science and technology. Accurate data must inform the district-wide and area-specific nitrate concentrations, demonstrating whether the projected targets are being met and if there is a further need for reductions. If the plan change goes through in the current form, it will send us bankrupt. We will no longer be a profitable business, our land will be devalued, and we will become unbankable. I understand that as One Incorporated and the Next Generation Farmers have proposed an alternative rule framework, and I support their submission and the outcomes sought. Thank you very much, Your Honour, and Commissioners, for listening.
Well, thank you. It's always good to hear from people like yourself who can come and tell us exactly as it seems to you and how it fits with the experience that you've had. Do we have any questions of Mr. Bishop, Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
Yeah, I'd just be interested in understanding your storage pond, the 300,000 cubic ponds. In terms of filling that, how does that work? Does it comes from the WIL race system,
Yep.
and then do you order water in advance, or do you receive water on a roster, or how does the filling the dam work in practice?
So it's all done on flow rate. So if the river's on a low flow, we're not allowed to take water to fill the dam. But if the river's, which is monitored by ECAN, if the river's at a good flow, then we can order water, and it takes 24 hours to arrive, and it's done via an app on our phone. And then it depends on, it's all dependent on what time of the year, how long it takes to fill it up. Yeah.
Okay. And is there a particular time of year that you tend to fill the pond? And
I always fill it at the end of winter, coming into the spring.
Yeah.
So that it comes summertime when we need to irrigate, it's full and ready to irrigate the whole farm.
Okay. And you mentioned that you're already at 17% below GMP. Was that baseline GMP, or what do you mean when you say GMP?
Good management practice, yes, a baseline GMP,
Okay.
I'm pretty sure, yeah.
Okay. All right, that's just a couple of things I was interested in clarifying, but thank you very much.
No worries, thank you.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Yes, just picking up on your paragraphs 34 and 35, where you say the oversaw tool doesn't recognise your good management practices and environmental initiatives.
Yep.
Other submitters have told us that too.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but just to let you know, I believe what you're saying, and we believe what you're saying. If you're saying you're making environmental improvements, then I acknowledge that.
Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Bishop, how are you finding with the auditing of your FEP?
I find it valuable because you always can improve. And when you have someone from outside who's independent coming onto your farm and finding things that you can improve on, it's always healthy for any business to have that, I think. And every year, we try and improve, but you need capital. You need to be spending money on capital expenditure to improve. And if we have a plan change like this come in, it'll stop us spending that money on capital. There's always something to do on farms, and you're always improving every year with technology, and I think that the auditing process is definitely valuable for my farming operation.
Not too bossy.
No, they're pretty good. They're generally pretty. They've got common sense, they're not. It's it's all pretty basic sort of stuff, yeah. But it's very, very valuable.
And does that get organised through WIL, does it?
Yes, it does, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, they'd make sure that the right sort of person who can be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much for all of that, Mr. Bishop. It's good of you to have come in and explain it to us.
I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Mr. Stokes next, I think. Good afternoon, Mr. Stokes.
Afternoon.
And welcome to you.
Thank you. Right. So I'm submission number 369, and
Right.
I'm not sure. Have you? I don't know. You've got so much to read. Have you read our submissions, or do I need to go through?
We have read it,
Right.
but you can just take us through it if you'd like to, or
Right.
just speak to how you feel about it.
Okay. Okay, so we, my family, we're the third generation where we are. My granddad bought the place after the war, and with another fella, Parkinson, and they named it Sinai because they fought in the Sinai desert, and the place looked like a desert because it's pretty dry out where we are next to the Waimak. So we run a farm, a mixed farm of sheep, deer, cropping, trading lambs, dairy grazing. So we've got multiple things going on all the time. And we're heavily involved in the community, like most farmers in the area. We're all committed to the community and helping out everywhere where we can, be it the school or different groups and the shows and everything. Where are we up to? So we've I've talked to firstly the FEPs that we have, the farm environmental plans, and as Darcy was saying, they are really brilliant. I think the great thing about them, they've brought that there were some people that were probably doing everything right, and it's actually brought everyone up to the right level, and it's helped us pick up on things that we may have missed, and I can't talk more highly of the FEP. I think it keeps us really at the level where we need to be. We on farm we have monitors, we moisture meter everything, so we know what's going on. We also invested in a storage pond, a 9-hectare one, which gives us control of when we need to irrigate, and when we don't, we can just store the water for later on. Especially with cropping, we don't need the water all the time, so we can stretch it out. And the kids enjoy playing in the pond well, so it's multi-purpose. What else? We, in our area where we are, sorry I'm jumping around a wee bit, but we're probably lucky. Our zone is deemed not too bad, and the Plan 7 thing is at the moment we can make things work so we can achieve that 2030 target of we're at 5 and 10%. The problem I feel is it has been really, we're lucky, but it's sort of been given the haves and the have-nots by zoning other people differently, where we're all in the same community, and it has been difficult for people that have been all of a sudden put into different zones. I think a focus on going to 2030 and then looking at it as everyone the same, and seeing where the improvements that have been made. Hopefully we don't need to go any further if that's the case, but yeah, I do really feel for my fellow farmers that have been caught up with it. And it's not to say that someone else comes along and decides to change, that it's my area that's the worst. And so, how they've changed it backwards and forwards, it's things change, and all of a sudden we could be the ones that are in the purple zone. So, I really think it needs to be right across the board. Right, where else? And yeah, as our farm, we dependent on the dairy farmers too, so it is pretty crucial that we keep them round and profitable, so they're happy to buy my grass and winter their cows for them. Just a bit of a rough idea on what we've spent for the environmental side of things. We the pond, that's been a major expense, probably about 600,000, and we re-nozzled all our pivots to make them more efficient, and installed water meters. We've got some Manuka stands on our block that we've fenced off just to keep them I mean, part of the history of the farm, there was a lot of manuka around on the farm when my granddad first got it. And just improvements all the time with sets of yards around the farm so we don't have to move the stock so far, less movements, and planting of shelter belts. And we're very lucky, we've got a lot of old man pines on our farm that spread right over through the farm, where the deer and all that, they love the old man pines for getting under, so we look after all them. There's farming now is, and I know people probably touched on it already, is actually quite a tough business to be in nowadays. It's never-ending stuff coming to us that we have to try and get our heads around, and to make sure that we're doing everything right, and sometimes it is to tick the boxes to make sure everyone's happy. But I feel with the FEP that solves a lot of those problems. Everyone is getting things right, but it does worry me with my children. I want them to go farming if they want to, but with everything that's coming our way, it's there could be better options for them than having to battle everything all the time. It does take a bit out of you at times, being worried about if you're doing the right thing and who's going to turn up for the next audit, because we do get audited for lots of different things with the sheep, and everything we do has to be ticked off. I think it's roughly, I think that's about it.
Covered it, yes. Well, we've read right through the statement that you put in, and thank you very much for preparing that. That would have been a big challenge to do too, but you've done that for us, and you've come in to meet us, and it's always helpful for us to meet you and your various colleagues and so forth. So thanks indeed for that. Maybe a question or two, just let's see. Commissioner Van Voorthuizen?
No questions from me. Like the Chair, I found your written evidence quite informative, and I didn't have any questions of clarification once I'd read through that, so thank you very much.
Commissioner Solomon?
No, none from me either, thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Stokes. Thanks for coming in, and we'll keep the notes of your submission. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for hearing me. Thank you.
So is that the full program for today?
Yes, that's correct, Commissioner Shepherd.
Yes. All right. Well, now I'll adjourn the hearing to Monday the 30th of November, starting at 10 o'clock back in the venue where you are now.